Over the last several weeks, I've received phone calls, emails, and had in-person conversations with people who wanted to know how they could support the podcast. At the time, I did not have a platform, so that stimulated several weeks of research to create a platform where everyone could support the podcast and it would not be exclusive. So I found a way through Patreon. To learn more about this, visit patreon.com/sports mastery. Stay tuned. My name is Deshaun Fauntleroy, and I am the creator of the Sports Mastery Podcast. As a young athlete, I didn't have anyone to guide me through the field of landmines that the student athlete faces. There was no one to talk about partying, peer pressure, and dating, and how all of these things could influence my performance and my future. There was no one to discuss overcoming fear, creating a legacy, defining my purpose, setting goals, mental toughness strategies, leadership, character development, or social dynamics. As a result, I struggled through much of high school and college, never really reaching my genetic and mental potential. Peer pressure, trying to fit in, partying, binge drinking, experimenting with recreational drugs were just a few things that held me back. Looking back, I wish I had someone that had been through that experience, someone who could have helped me navigate those landmines in a more mindful and constructive way. It would have saved me a lot of pain, misery, and hardship. Sports Mastery has been formulated to help the motivated but struggling student athlete to accomplish their hopes and dreams. But they can't do it alone. They need you, the parent, the mentor, the coach. This podcast provides the student athlete and their support team with the systems and strategies to help them break through all barriers and limitations. My goal with these audio podcasts is to interview parents and coaches and ask them questions about their journey in the realm of developing student athletes. I like for them to discuss their tips and strategies that they have learned over their time being a parent and coach. Ultimately, I like to create a platform to share information, experience, and dialogue to better help our student athletes. Financial support from you, the listeners, is what keeps this going. And the podcast really needs more funding to grow, not only to become financially stable, but to grow. A budget to interview guests globally instead of locally is one of my dreams. Because of the intimate nature of the interviews, in-person conversations are sometimes necessary. Your support will allow me to dedicate more time to working on the show. It will allow me to hire an audio editor, sound engineer, a videographer, publicist, and a social media manager. Put simply, the more you help out, the better quality of podcasts I can produce and develop for you. In addition, I'll be able to start producing monthly webinars on topics suggested by Patreon supporters. So to support the Sports Mastery Podcast, I've created a Patreon page. Go check this out at patreon.com/sports mastery. That's PATREON/sports mastery. Peace and blessing. Welcome back to the show, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, heroes and villains. I know your time is precious, so we're going to get right into today's show. In today's show, we're going to do something different. We're going to be doing some different things for a while. What I'm looking to do is to do more interviews with parents and coaches. I'm looking to put together a situation to where we can share information, experience, and dialogue to better help our student athletes. So some of the common themes that we'll be discussing over the next several weeks is strategies to develop discipline, overcoming procrastination, using reflective thinking, and overcoming barriers and limitations. We're going to be hearing from parents as they discuss these things and how these things are taught in the home. I have a woman that I have coming on today. Her name is Erin. I've worked with her, her son, and her husband in the past. And today we're going to discuss what is your number one strategy that you use at home to develop discipline with your student athlete. I want to welcome to the show Erin M. I've trained her son Ronan in the past. So Erin, tell us a little bit about yourself and your son.
Okay, Dee, thanks for having me. I have a great son. He's a twin, has a twin sister, and he's a great athlete, great thoughtful student, thoughtful person, just an altogether good kid. A lot of potential. I love him dearly. He loves athletics, football, snowboarding, all sorts of different things, and really loves to develop his skills, whether it's looking at videos online, practicing with friends, anything he can get. He reads a lot. He watches a lot of things, observing other athletes, seeing what they're doing correctly, incorrectly, all that sort of thing.
You know, one of the things that I was impressed with Ronan, it seems like we worked together for about maybe a year to a year and a half. Was it that or longer?
At least a year and a half, I think.
Okay, one of the things that always impressed me with Ronan was his ability to show up week after week and just come in and do the work, where I never had to talk to him or discuss with him, any obnoxious activities. He was never a distraction.
Mm-hmm.
I never had to worry about him talking or overstepping his bounds in our training. And I know that discipline had to come from somewhere. So I'd like to get into our first topic today is like, I know I've met your husband, Chris, on a number of occasions. You've been to the gym several times. I want to ask you, what is your number one strategy that you use at home to develop discipline with Ronan? And I think that your twin is a daughter.
That's
am I
right.
correct?
That's right.
His twin? Yes. So how is that discipline developed in your household for them to come out into the real world and function when you're not around?
Well, I had to think about that one for a minute. And the first thing that popped into my head was the fact that we have always kept a schedule with them. And part of it was when they were born, we had to, so that we could get some sleep and just, as newborn babies. And that schedule just sort of continued. Like, this is when we go to bed. This is, when we do this. This is when we do that. It was pretty tight when we were little, and the kids were little, and they had nap time, and just it just became second habit. They knew what to expect, and as they've gotten older, it's kind of become second nature, and they can kind of take control of that themselves and experience some independence. And by doing that, both of the kids, they weren't fussy. They got enough sleep. It just became second nature, that repetition. And this is what we do. And that has continued into school and athletics and, any extracurricular. They can kind of keep their own schedule. They know in advance, this is what's happening for me today. Whether it's on their calendar, maybe I sometimes remind them, just make sure that everyone's on the same plate. And it just has really helped them both. And Ronan has been more active in sports than Lila up until recently. And, they are totally prepared for it ahead of time versus scrambling at the last second to try to, you're forgetting about meetings or practices or homework or all of that sort of thing. And I think that schedule is really the biggest thing that we've done. And it really helps reduce their anxiety as well. Because as we both know, kids have a lot of anxiety these days.
They do. I like your approach to discipline in terms of having a consistent schedule. That makes a lot of sense because it's almost like the discipline comes out of the day-to-day activity. Transitioning, how does the home schedule change from middle school to high school?
Well, I think, high school, there's a lot more independence, just as far as when they need to check in, let's say with me or Chris, we allow them, they're out there taking public transportation. They're responsible for getting themselves to some of their own practices. That sort of thing is a big transition. And you kind of do it bit by bit versus saying, I'm going to pick you up. You say, you got to take the Max home or whatever the situation is. And just slowly, like every year or every few months, they become a little more grown up and are given more responsibility. And when we see that they can handle that, then they get more bit by bit, as opposed to just throwing it all on them at once or not allowing them to have it at all.
So there's it sounds like along with the consistent scheduling, there's also some positive reinforcement in there to give them leeway to do some activities on their own, or, make special requests.
And that as a parent, that's a hard thing to kind of just say, okay, you're on your own, and you kind of gauge everything. And it, it allows them, when they graduate in 3.5 years, that they're going to be able to handle all of that and be off in college and be able to get to their own practices and all of that stuff. And it takes, I think, a lot of practice. I think I totally feel that they will both be set for whatever is going to be out there for them.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong. I know time can fly by at times, but they're freshmen in high school this year.
Mm-hmm.
Am I correct? You mentioned earlier, the consistency of having a schedule. And then once they get to high school, there's a little more independence. But sometimes that independence, when you open the barriers up, they might not get things done as fast as they should, whether it's a project at home, it could be a chore, or it could be maybe an end of the term assignment. How do you deal with procrastination when you see Ronan or Lila procrastinating? How do you motivate him or her to take action?
Yeah, that one is a hard one because neither one of them are horrible in that respect. So a lot of times I just have to say something to them and remind them again and again and again. Sometimes it's, a lot of times it's just that, just reminding, hey, you need to do this or you need to do that. They both of their schools have, you can look online and see what's happening with their grade progress and the classes that the reports that they have due, or their schedule's all right there for me to see. So I kind of check in and do that check in with them. And they never procrastinate to a disastrous moment. So I haven't had to deal with that. But, sometimes it's just dangling a little something like, oh, we'll go out to lunch, or, we'll go to the movies, or, hey, we'll go skiing at the mountain, or whatever I think one of them might like to do. And just remind them that, hey, if you get this done this morning, like it's Sunday morning, if you get this done, then we can do this afternoon. And I haven't really had that much of an issue with it, thankfully.
I like that because it sounds like you're using more of what would be considered a positive stimulus to get something done versus like a negative or aversive stimulus, if that makes sense.
It's hard because, you try to figure out what's the best solution and how to raise your kid. And, we've never had to take something away or ground them or do anything like that. And I know a lot of families have to institute that with their children. And I don't really think that for us, that sort of thing would work very well because they haven't shown any need for that at this juncture. And positive just seems to work better than, like giving them something or suggesting something seems to be better than taking something away.
I wanted to ask you, has there ever been a time to where there may have been some type of procrastinating? Maybe a job wasn't done around the house, or maybe they had to suffer the consequences of not getting an assignment turned in on time. How did you use maybe, I like to use reflective thinking to overcome that, or how did you ask them to reflect so that wouldn't happen again, or putting themselves in a situation where, some type of the work wasn't done, they didn't live up to expectations?
I think, like for me, I like to look back and think about, what was I like when I was 15 years old, and how did I want to be treated? And I think back to, each one of them are very different. How did they react to misbehaving or whatever when they were younger? And I think, we haven't had, luckily, any great tragedies with things, but they are given with regard to school, they've been given, they're still at a point where they're given an opportunity often to redo that work. I usually just have a discussion with them and say, hey, what happened with this test? Or, reminding them that they need to be their own advocate and talk to the teacher, which I think is a hard thing for kids to learn to do because, your parents totally do everything for you, when you're in elementary school and middle school, and then you get to high school and you have to talk for yourself because the teachers don't want to hear from the parents. They kind of do, but they really don't. They want the kids to stand up for themselves. And often it's that little push and that reminder that you need to think about what you could have done better. Maybe you studied at the last minute, maybe you didn't study at all. And I remind them that will work for a while in high school, and every year it gets harder and harder, and the teachers don't give you as much leeway. But when you're in college, you're on your own completely. You're not going to be able to hand things in late. And so they, I like them to think about that. And Ronan gave me an interesting example. This had to do with his working out. And we were talking about it last night, and he said that, he goes to the gym several times a week, just on his own, just the gym that we belong to. And he said, he used to work out until he was fatigued, and then he just he wouldn't push himself. And he started thinking, how come I'm not improving? What can I do? And he took it on himself to watch some videos online and see what other people are doing. And he altered his routine on his own, and he pushes himself through the entire thing now just on his own. We're not there with him, pushing him, and the trainers there aren't pushing him. He's just kind of doing it himself, and he's improved vastly with his weight, the weight that he can lift, and all that other stuff there, by just kind of looking back and saying, well, what am I not doing, because I'm just kind of maintaining the status quo.
Yes, I think I think it's awesome for a ninth grader to ask himself, what am I not doing, or how can I get better, or what are some things that I can do to improve? And then they go out and answer those questions. I think that's awesome right there. What would you say, and you can speak for Ronan or you can speak for Lila, what are their barriers and limitations?
I think this would go for both of them. I think the biggest barrier, is being a young teenager and comparing yourself to others. We all do that, and the older we get, the less we care. But when you're 15, you care about what other people think, and you care about how you're presenting yourself, and what do people think of me? What was my past performance in this sport, and are they going to remember that maybe I had an injury, or maybe I wasn't as good as I'd like to be? And I think that having that self-confidence, and whether it's in sports or academics or anything, it's a really big game changer, for kids when they're young teens. And, like I mentioned before, being your own advocate and taking initiative. I think that really needs to be taught. I don't think people just do that automatically. And even a lot of adults can't do that. So that's something I really like to push and to give themselves time. Their academics, they both know it comes first, but I want them to be proud of what they do in other areas as well. And just like finding, good mentors, which, that's so needed right now. Cause a lot of times, you're just you're kind of on your own. Like once you hit high school, I've really noticed it's like, kapow, you can make the most of it, or you can just slide through. And I don't think sliding through is just an option these days, because kids really miss out on a lot of things. But it's easy to do because you're just kind of going to class and leaving. And I think it's really important to try to hook up with somebody, because you have your parents, but you need some other people in your community as well.
Yeah, I agree, and that's one of the basis of our program is character and leadership development. And in certain areas or certain cities or at certain schools, it could seem like it's kind of just glossed over, or there's no depth to it. And one of the things that we aspire to here at Sports Mastery is to have some depth when it comes to communicating with athletes, helping them understand the power dynamics between the student athlete and the parents and the coaches, the student athletes and the coaches, and helping them socially as far as having strategies for success, because, it's different now because we have all of this social media, so it's hard to have privacy. And you know what it's like. You could be peer pressured through social media, where it might not be like a physical bullying thing. It could just be the social pressure to act or to be a certain way that might not be really you or your son at the time. I often tell people we can't bash the kids for being on social media. And it's almost like in some instances, or for some people, it's an addiction, but it's a distraction, and it's also an addiction at the same time. And like 25 years ago, we didn't have that. So it's kind of hard for us to make that comparison. Sometimes I think it's unfair, all we can do is, help the youth with systems and strategies to not allow themselves to be distracted or become addicted to certain things, where you're living on the internet and then you don't develop any social skills when it's time to go have a conversation with your instructor.
Exactly. And I think also, like you're right, like my kids for sure, they've only had that. It's been a part of their life almost from day one. And, I think for me, and for you and for Chris and, anyone who is older than this whole social media thing, we can step away from it. We remember when, people actually went out and talked to one another, as opposed to looking at their phones. And, I have a love-hate relationship with it. I love it as much as the next person, but I know when to quit and, and just spend time with my friends and family and appreciate the world out there, and also understand what's truth and not truth. And my friends and I like to joke about social media making you just feel bad about yourself, and it is true, and we laugh about it, but it's true. It's like, oh, look at these people showing off. It's kind of unfortunately what a lot of it has come down to. But then there are also, there are pluses and minuses, but it's kind of having, kind of watching your kids and saying, hey, let's take a break from this and do something different and live your life and have a good time.
I agree. Well, Erin, I want to thank you for coming on. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're listening to this show today, we've discussed what is your number one strategy that you use at home to develop discipline with your student athlete. When you find your student athlete procrastinating, how do you motivate him or her to take action? We also discuss how do you use reflective thinking to support achievement and well-being. And lastly, we discuss what are your student athletes' barriers and limitations. If you're just coming on to the show, you might want to check this out and listen to it again. We are looking forward to having more parents and coaches come on to discuss. And I say this, Erin, because what I firmly believe is the first coaches are the parents. And I think that's why this project is important, because if you've been a coach at home, it's going to show when you're not around. Not to say it's good or bad, but when a person comes into your facility and you can see the smallest amounts of discipline and learning to look for the good in every student athlete, I think us as like sports coaches, we can take athletes a lot further when we begin to look at them as people, versus athletes, and then getting to know the parents. And I always encourage other coaches to not only to get to know the student athlete, but get to know the parents, because then that's going to bridge the gap in communication, and on the flip side, I'm always, expressing to parents to get to know the sports coaches, get to know the trainers that they're working with. So then that conversation is synergistic. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're liking this show, head on over to patreon.com/sports mastery. There you can learn more about the mission of Sports Mastery. You can learn more about our goals for the podcast, and you can also see our rewards for being a supporter of the podcast. Peace and blessings, and thank you for listening.